Hey guys, welcome to Unit 1.2, which is going to be the short-term causes of the First World War. Unit 1.1 being the long-term causes, the main causes, as a lot of teachers call it. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that before, or many of you might have heard that and studied those words before. 1.2 might be a little bit newer for some of you, which is okay. That's fine. What really makes these things the short-term causes is they mainly happen between the years 1910 and 1914. The long-term causes go farther back into the 1800s, whereas the short-term causes are mostly in the 1900s, the turn of the century. All right. Think of that balloon examples I talked about in Unit 1.1. All right, there's a balloon, and with each event, more and more air goes into that balloon, more and more tension goes into that balloon, until that balloon pops and Europe outbreaks in war. All right, World War I, the First World War. All right, so have that in the back of your head. Now, as I go through these slides, I'm not going to read the bullets verbatim. There's a difference between narrative history and analytical history. Okay, narrative history is the story. All right, it would be like me narrating a story to you guys. That would be like you reading this, which you have an assignment coming up in one of these books relatively soon. Narrative history is fine. It's good. It's good. It's a good overview. It's a good summary. I want you guys to start learning how to be a little bit more analytical. All right, taking the story and taking the important parts out and drawing your own conclusions. And I'm going to try to model that for you here in this first PowerPoint. All right, so try and really pick out the important numbers. All right, so essentially Morocco. We have a lot going on in Morocco. Morocco is, if you did not know, in Africa. All right, it's northern Africa. France had control over northern Africa. It wasn't necessarily a colony of France, but it had a lot of influence there. Germany, as I talked about in the long-term causes of World War I, wants colonies very, very, very badly. All right, it has quickly risen to the kind of number 2 position in Europe without access to many colonies. So they say to themselves, imagine what we could do if we had colonies. All right, and it's going to test that kind of very, very old rivalry between France and Germany by denouncing French influence in Morocco, by going in and kind of trying to take influence away from France and input more influence from Germany, all right, to get access to the raw materials and the trade that Morocco had to offer. So Germany is going to go into Morocco and it's going to flex a little bit. It's going to try to bully France. Okay? If you remember, I made reference to a war in the long-term causes of World War I video. All right? That war is this one. Franco. Oh, boy, that was bad. I think you guys get the point. The Franco-Prussian War. Okay? The Germans knew that they could beat the French in a war because they had already done it, all right, in 1870. And the French knew that the Germans could beat them in a war because they had already done it. So when the Germans kind of flex their muscles towards France, France gets a little bit intimidated. So when the Germans go into Morocco, the French were going to back down, all right? The French were going to back down. But then that's when Britain is going to step in, all right? That balance of power, right? Germany was rising to the number 2 rank and really testing, pushing Britain out of maybe that number 1 spot. So Britain has to keep Germany in check. So they're going to come to the side of France and say, France, you cannot back down. All right? So Britain calls for this thing right here, the Algeciras Conference in 1906, where Britain is going to say, okay, Germany, you want to flex? We're going to flex harder because we are still the most powerful country in the world. All right? So we learn a lot from this part of the Moroccan crisis. We learn that Germany can kind of bully France, but Britain can bully Germany, right? So Germany backs down, all right? Germany withdraws from Morocco after Britain steps in at the Algeciras Conference in 1906. All right? I'm going to come back to this part right here in a second. But King Edward the Seventh said that this was the most mischievous and uncalled for event which the German Empire has been engaged in since he came to the throne. So Britain knew what the Germans were up to here, and they knew that they were trying to upset the balance of power. and that if Britain had not stepped in, Germany would have pushed the French out of Morocco and really upset agreements that have been going on in Europe for a very long time. So Britain steps in and kind of pushes Germany to the side. Moving on. Anytime in history, the historians are not the most creative of people. Anytime there's a first something, chances are there's going to be a second something, right? So the second Moroccan crisis. A couple years later, in 1906, there is unrest in Morocco, right? There's a little bit of a rebellion in Morocco amongst the Moroccans themselves. Germany says, oh no, we have citizens in Morocco, we need to go protect them. We need to go protect our citizens. So they're going to send their navy to the coast of the port of Agadir, all right? It's a port in Morocco itself. So they're going to say, Algeciras Conference, you're old news, we don't care about you anymore. We're going to test our strength one more time and see if we can push the French out of Morocco once and for all. All right. As soon as Germany started to send its boats over to Morocco, Britain does the exact same thing. All right. And when it comes to boats, no one's got better boats than the British. If you remember from Unit 1.1, the long-term causes, what's the name of that boat that the British kind of unveiled in 1906? It was the biggest boat in the water. It's called the Dreadnought. All right. So Britain is once again going to flex, and Germany is once again going to have to back down. Okay. So that was a lot of story, right? That was a lot of narrative history. Let's look at this right here. Okay. This part right here. Morocco. What are the results? What are the takeaways? Number one, we learned that Germany is still second fiddle to Great Britain, all right? That Germany can push around France, yeah, sure. But once Britain steps in, Germany backs down, all right? They know, the Germans know that they cannot beat Britain in a war because of its naval superiority and its access to seemingly unlimited natural resources, right? We also learned that Britain and France become closer as an alliance with one another, okay? Britain is willing to go to war to protect France, to protect itself, really, to protect that balance of power in Europe. All right, and that's what this says. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Oops. Okay, we've got the Bosnian crisis. Okay, so when we talk about Bosnia, we are talking about this. Do you guys remember this video right here? Oh, look, there's me. There's two of me. This right here. All right, that's the Balkans. Okay. So essentially, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, used to have control over all of this stuff and much, much more, right? The Ottoman Empire was very, very, very large. By the turn of the century, in the 1900s, it started to collapse in on itself. Like I said in the last video, it was called the sick, dying man of Europe, or the old dying man of Europe, right? It was crumbling. The more it crumbled, the more its old possessions claimed their own independence. Okay, and they've said, okay, the Ottomans can't rule us anymore. We're our own ethnicity. We have our own forms of nationalism inside, so we are going to declare our independence from the Ottoman Empire and form our own sovereign nations. Okay? Austria-Hungary said, that's all great that countries are kind of declaring their independence, except we don't really care about it. All right? So it saw an opportunity to take control over Bosnia, which was a Balkan territory, again, once owned by the Ottoman Empire. All right? So the Austrians are going to come in, and this is kind of a big vocabulary word. They are going to annex the territory of Bosnia. All right? Annex, I always think of Finding Nemo. All right? The fish that go, mine, 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 mine. That's annexation. You're taking and you're not really asking. Okay? So Austria-Hungary just goes in and they annex Bosnia. Okay? Let's go back to this map. All right? Anytime you're dealing with this part of the world, all right, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, once I say that, it should make sense. Anytime you're dealing with Eastern Europe, you got to go through this big guy, right? You got to go through Russia, and you got to kind of ask Russia for permission on what you're doing. Except the Austrians didn't. They just went in and mine, right? They annexed the territory, all right? So Russia's going to be like, whoa, this is our backyard. You can't just come in and take territory without really asking us, or at least, giving us something in return. So Russia proposed a conference to talk about this, and Austria said, nah, we're good. All right. We're not going to go to a conference. We took it. Deal with it. Germany, Russia then says, hey, Austria, that's not really the way it works. And Germany is going to start to prepare for war and say, hey, Russia, if you want to mess with our friend Austria, we're going to mess with you, and we've got a military. We have a lot to mess with, right? So Russia and Serbia, all right, so let's go back to this map, right? The Balkans, Serbia is a big country in the Balkans, right? The Serbian nationalists thought that they were the leaders of the Balkans themselves. So once Germany steps in and they flex, right, they just got flexed on in Morocco, now they're doing the flexing in the Balkans. See, Britain, very far from the Balkans. They really don't care about the Balkans very much, all right? So Germany goes in, they flex, Russia, Serbia have to back down, all right? So Kaiser Wilhelm II shows his friendship to the Austrians, okay? Let's go to my results here for a second. Awesome. The results. 1. The Balkans become known as the powder keg of Europe. All right. You guys probably know what a keg is. It's a metal or wooden barrel that holds things. It holds. You should never know about this, but it holds beer or whiskey. Right. That's something that kegs hold. That's kind of very commonly used. Back then, it could hold gunpowder. Right. If you light a match near a keg of gunpowder, that gunpowder is eventually going to explode. So they call the Balkans the powder keg. It was only a matter of time until the Balkans blew up in a war because there were so many ethnicities there, so many different forms of nationalism, and everyone thought that they were the best. All right? Someone had to prove themselves as the best, and it was only a matter of time until we erupted into war with someone trying to prove themselves. All right? If we go back to our PowerPoint, right here, Germany is going to give Austria a blank check, okay? They are going to tell the Austrians that whatever happens, we are there to back you up, okay? If Russia tries to attack you, if Serbia tries to attack you, if any Balkan country tries to attack you, or even if you want to go in and attack a Balkan country, we have your back, okay? We have your back. The Germans were doing this in a reaction to the alliance that Britain and France solidified a couple years earlier. So they said, all right, Britain and France got closer. I need to solidify my alliances as well. So I'm going to go in and back up Austria, hoping that Austria says back to me, all right, we've got your back too. Okay? So there's a lot going on. That's why I said that those long-term causes are so deep-rooted. This is alliances and nationalism and militarism all boiling into kind of one short-term event, the Bosnian crisis. All right, let's go back to here real quick. All right, and another kind of result of everything in Bosnia is we're getting one step closer. All right, mobilization is happening. Countries are telling its militaries to be ready for an attack. Okay, I'm going to take a pause to this video. It got long. Catch back for part 2 very soon.